it's great to be here with you, and this is the first part in a presentation about how to understand Islam, and I'll be focusing on the shahada. What does it mean to confess Islam, and what is attached to that statement of acknowledging that Muhammad is the Prophet and that there is only one God. I want to make a few introductory comments. The first one is that Muslims are very diverse across the world, and they vary a great deal in the degree to which they practice Islam and the nature of their beliefs. Some of them have what you might call folk Islam with very localized beliefs and practices. Many Muslims don't even like Islam and distance themselves from part of it. This session is not so much about Muslims, about Islam, how the system works as a religion. Another point I'd like to make is that the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said that sometimes we think that we are tracing the shape of reality, but in fact all we're doing is tracing the shape of the frame through which we're looking. So we think we know what that other thing looks like, but in fact we're just looking at the frame through which we're viewing it. And what I'm going to try and do in this session is actually set aside the frame, that is a Western or a Christian way of thinking about Islam, and look at Islam as it describes itself, as it defines itself. My third point, introductory point to make, is that when you approach the issue of Islam, you need to hold love and truth together, very much so. You need to be moved by the love of God for Muslim people, indeed for all people, but also to be quite uncompromising in acknowledging the truth as well, and not to compromise one for the other. Often when people engage with Islam, they're tempted to have just a truth focus or just a love focus, but it's really important to hold both together. So this is the introductory session. I'll be looking at the human problem in Islam, the question of what is the human problem. If you ask Christians all over the world what is the fundamental human problem, they will say it is sin. And the solution to sin is forgiveness, and the result of forgiveness is salvation. But in Islam, the human problem is not sin, it's rather different. And the easiest way to introduce this to you is firstly to explain that Islam itself, an Arabic word, means submission or surrender. It is the peaceful state that comes when you surrender to another. The word Muslim, also related, means a submitter. And perhaps the most simplest way to explain what it means to be a Muslim is with the name Abdullah, which means slave of Allah. A Muslim is a slave of Allah, someone who has submitted to Allah as a slave submits to a master. That's the fundamental metaphor for being a believer in Islam. Now, to understand what that means to be a slave of Allah, you need to frame that in terms of the Islamic understanding of the human problem. As I mentioned, in the Christian worldview, the human problem is sin, which is a breach of relationship with a loving God, with our Creator. And the solution to that is forgiveness from God, leading to an experience of rescue, or what we call salvation. Rescue out of a broken relationship, rescue out of a pathway of death, rescue into eternal relationship with God. Salvation. In Islam, sin is not really such a big problem. And Islam doesn't have a concept of salvation as such. According to Islam, the fundamental problem is ignorance. If you can imagine a slave in the household of Allah, and they don't know what their job description is, they don't know what they should be doing, and they risk making their master very angry because they're not doing their job. So their greatest priority, their greatest need is to find out what on earth they're meant to be doing in that house. Every slave has a role, has duties to perform. There are things they can't do, things they have to do. And so the solution to that state of ignorance is guidance. Islam has the view that human beings are not inherently sinful but are easily led astray, so they need to be rightly guided. And the result of being rightly guided, according to Islam, is success, falah. Now that is, in a sense, the equivalent of salvation. Islam promises success in this life and the next. The call to prayer says, come to success, come to success. If you're rightly guided, you will be successful. And Muslim communities are very much focused on being successful, and when Islam is presented to people, it's presented in terms of finding the right guidance. Now, if I was saying this to you and you were saying, yeah, I need to be rightly guided, I'd like to be a good slave in Allah's house, Obviously the next question would be, how can I become a Muslim? How can I be a submitter? How can I be rightly guided? Well, you become a Muslim by saying and believing the Islamic creed, very short statement of faith, the shahada. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is Allah's messenger. If you understand that sentence, you understand Islam. And I'm going to spend the rest of this session, the various parts of this session, explaining what that means, unpacking the shahada and its content. And particularly, we'll be focusing on the second part, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Remember, the question is, how can I be rightly guided? How can I find guidance? What is the way to be successful? And the answer is to follow the guide, that is Muhammad. He is the guide. And where it says Muhammad is Allah's messenger, that means he is the one who provides the guidance to those who want to be obedient slaves of Allah. The guidance of Muhammad then comes to us, and you'd want to know, how can I find this guidance? It comes to us in two ways. Sometimes Christians think that the Quran is equivalent to the Bible. That's quite a misleading way to think about the Quran. It's different in a number of ways, but perhaps the most important thing is that the Quran is not the whole canon of Islam. The canon of Islam, the foundation upon which Islam is built, is the Quran and the life and teaching of Muhammad, which is called the Sunnah. So the Sunnah is a word that refers to everything that Muhammad did and said. And that becomes part of the canon, the foundation of Islam. When Muslims work out how to be a Muslim, how to be rightly guided, they construct that guidance or that system of guidance based on what the Quran says, yes, but also on what the Sunnah says. How then, you might ask, can I access this information? How can I find out about the teaching of Muhammad and the example of Muhammad? It's interesting that some people have said, oh, I'll just have a Quran-only Islam. I really don't need Muhammad. The problem with that is that the Quran says again and again that Muhammad's example is obligatory. There are many, many verses that say this, but here are just some of them. And there is a protester there, and he's protesting against the Danish cartoons, and he's saying the Prophet is the greatest man that ever lived. That's a fundamental view in Islam. Muhammad is the best person. He's the best example. He's the most perfect guide, person to follow. And Surah 24, that's chapter 24, verse 54 of the Quran says, say, that is saying to Muhammad, tell people, obey Allah and obey the messenger. So you should obey God and Muhammad. If you obey him, you'll go aright. Chapter Surah 53, verses 1 to 3, by the star when it sets, your comrade Muhammad doesn't err, nor is he deceived, nor does he speak of his own desire. People had been challenging Muhammad and saying, you're a bit confused, and he was saying, Allah is telling you that I'm not led astray, that I'm not deceived, and I don't speak out of my own heart. So everything that he's saying, everything I say, everything Muhammad says is from Allah. Not just the Quran, but other things as well, other kinds of guidance. And there are stern, very stern warnings in the Quran about not following Muhammad's guidance. 59 verse 7 says, whatsoever the messenger, that is Muhammad, gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids, abstain from it. Keep your duty to Allah. Lo, Allah is stern in reprisal. He will punish those who don't follow the example of Muhammad or reject the example of Muhammad. So if you're wanting to become a Muslim and follow the path, the rightly guided path, and you know that the example of Muhammad is found in the Quran and the Sunnah, you might want to access those sources. And the Quran obviously is a book, but how do you access the life and the teaching of Muhammad? Where is that information available? Often if someone becomes a Muslim, they might be given a little booklet with a list of some things that Muhammad has said and did. And what happened was, in the first centuries of Islam, the Muslim community recorded sayings of Muhammad and things that were observed that he did by his followers, and these are called hadith. These are sometimes called traditions, things that Muhammad did and said. Sometimes they're just a sentence, sometimes they might be a page. There are tens of thousands of these, And they're recorded in their final form some centuries after Muhammad. 200 or 300 years after Muhammad, the canon of Islam, meaning the hadiths, the description of the sunnah, the life and the teaching of Muhammad, gets codified and collected into these collections. Not all hadiths are regarded as equally reliable, so Muslims acknowledge that, and some are regarded as secure or sahih, and others are less reliable. And it's a very complex, interesting study which ones are more reliable, and Muslims will sometimes debate about that. The Quran is regarded as letter perfect. However, the hadiths have varying degrees of reliability. These are preserved in collections, and Sunni Muslims recognize 6 of these collections, and Shiites have more. But just to give you an idea of how this information is organized, Sahih al-Bukhari is perhaps the most revered of the collections that Sunnis use, and it's made up. Sahih means reliable, so it's accepted that all of the hadiths in his collection are reliable, and this is organized into 93 books. And for example, there's the Book of Oaths and Vows. This is everything that Muhammad had to say, that al-Bukhari, he was from Bukhara, reliably believed that he had to say about oaths and vows. The Book of Tricks, the Book of Marriage, the Book of Manners, how should you dye your beard, what color, should you shave under your armpits, how do you talk to people, all these sorts of things. And the Book of Jihad, that's all about warfare. And so there's 93 of these books, and they're organized for legal purposes. So a judge could look up a topic. Oh, this case is about theft. What did Muhammad say about theft? We'll look up the appropriate book. Here's an example of a hadith. This is from the Book of Good Manners. Chapter 105 is entitled, What is liked regarding sneezing and what is disliked regarding yawning. Narrated Abu Huraira. Abu Huraira is the person who recorded this. He said, the Prophet, that is Muhammad, said, Allah likes sneezing and dislikes yawning. So if someone sneezes and then praises Allah, then it's obligatory on every Muslim who hears him to say, may Allah be merciful to you. But as regards yawning, it's from Satan, so one must try one's best to stop it. And if one says ha while yawning, that is, if your mouth opens, then Satan will laugh at him. What's interesting about this tradition is it means that closing your mouth when yawning is a religious obligation, not just a matter of politeness. In Australia, it's very practical because a fly might go into your mouth if you leave your mouth open. But in Islam, to bless someone who has sneezed or to close your mouth, these are something that a mother would teach a child, but it is part of religion. And in fact, lots of things that are just part of culture or politeness in many societies in Islam become part of religious obligation. And there's a lot of detail about what to do. The sorts of things that are recorded about the life of Muhammad are very, very extensive. So for example, he gave instructions on which foot to put in front of the other as you go through a doorway. It's the right foot going through normal doors and the left foot when you go into the bathroom. There are instructions about which side of the body to sleep on and which way you should lay yourself when you sleep. In fact, in an ordinary Sunday school classroom in a church, a child would probably get most of the questions right if they answered Jesus to the questions. And in Islam, if you ask the question about Islam, the answer is usually Muhammad. For example, let me test your knowledge of Islam. Radical Muslim men often wear big beards. Why do they wear big beards? The answer is Muhammad. Exactly, because he wore a big beard. Muslim women often cover up. Why do they cover up? The answer is Muhammad, because he required his wives to cover up. In fact, almost all the questions about Islam can be answered by the word Muhammad. And there was once a very famous Muslim scholar who refused to eat watermelon. And he did that because there was no instructions or evidence in the life of Muhammad about how Muhammad ate watermelon. And lacking instruction, he preferred, as a matter of precaution, not to risk the wrath of Allah by doing something for which he had no instruction, so he preferred to eat other foods instead. That's the end of the first part.